Turkey has lived through several coups and coup attempts over the decades, and these blows to its democratic system often took several years to repair. But despite constant threat of military intervention, the country has always managed to rise back up and rebuild its democracy. Here's a short history of Turkey's battle with military takeovers and its struggle to reinstate a fair system. On May 27, 1960, the Republic of Turkey experienced its very first coup d'etat. It's referred to as the Dark Day in Turkish history.
Sevgili vatandaşlar, dün gece yarısından itibaren bütün Türkiye'de deniz, hava, kara, Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri el ele vererek memleketin idaresini ele almıştır.
Then democratically elected Prime Minister, who had won 3 elections and governed for 10 years, Adnan Menderes, was arrested along with President Celal Bayar and other ministers. The military accused the government of violating the constitution and placed retired General Cemal Gürsel, one of the coup leaders, as the president, prime minister and minister of defense. The accusations of treason against the governing Democratic Party came after it had overwhelmingly gained the people's support after easing some previous strict rules pertaining to religious practices, such as allowing thousands of mosques to reopen and legalizing the call to prayer in Arabic instead of Turkish. This upset both the opposition and the military, who considered Menderes a threat to the country's secular values. Civil unrest and tensions arose in the country, and the government's independent foreign policy had also led to its isolation by the West, especially by the US. So after almost a year of military trials following the coup, the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister and Finance Ministers were executed in September 1961, despite calls by several states to halt the executions. Their remains are inside this mausoleum, and after this incident, which is considered the first attack on Turkish democracy, the military continued to dominate Turkish politics until 1965. But events of that day and the months that followed still haunt Turkish politics, as coup leaders chose to hang a popular prime minister and 2 of his cabinet ministers instead of solving the nation's issues by using democratic means. It was only after 29 years that the men who were hanged were posthumously pardoned. But the story of coups in Turkey doesn't end there. On March 12, 1971, during widespread unrest caused by a recession and economic downturn along with incitement and support of violence by some of the military's members, the Turkish army intervened yet again. It accused the government of driving the country into anarchy and demanded the formation of a strong government inspired by Atatürk's views. This resulted in the resignation of Prime Minister Süleyman Demirel. Years of instability and violence followed, with the country changing prime ministers 11 times after that. Violent clashes took place in the streets, during which thousands of people were assassinated. And on September 12, 1980, at the height of the Cold War, as Turkey's democracy was being threatened in the face of growing military pressure and clashes were taking place between left-wing and right-wing groups, army officers announced on state television that they were imposing martial law and dissolving the government. A headline even read, "Life back to normal throughout Turkey." Coup leader General Kenan Evren quickly became president. And in the following years, hundreds of thousands of people got arrested and dozens of executions took place. In the process, 1,683,000 people were blacklisted, 650,000 detained, 517 given death sentences, 50 people, including juveniles, hanged, 30,000 lost their jobs, 14,000 had their Turkish citizenships revoked. Of the 300 who died in suspicious circumstances, 171 were ruled death by torture. Hundreds of films banned, many journalists were tried, imprisoned, attacked and 3 were killed. 30,000 people became political refugees and a new constitution was drafted in 1982. This was all a result of the military takeover that claimed it was restoring order and bringing life back to normal. And while some welcomed the coup to put a stop to the political turmoil and violence that was taking place across the country, the aftermath mostly saw executions, torture, and the suspension of civil liberties and political life. Till this day, it's a reminder of trauma and pain for many. But just a few years later, in 1983, things started to look brighter. In the 1983 elections, Turgut Özal's Motherland Party swept the victory, making him Turkey's new prime minister. In the years that followed, Özal's government helped stabilize the Turkish economy and increase employment while decreasing inflation in the country. Many Turks agree that it was during Özal's time in office that the country broke away from its isolationist policies and opened up to the world, despite coinciding with the aftermath of a coup that hindered political life for years.
And it wasn't until 2010 that the Turkish public was able to hold the perpetrators of this dark period in the country's history accountable.
On February 28, 1997, the military issued a series of recommendations which the government had no choice but to accept. These recommendations included a compulsory 8-year education program to prevent students from enrolling in religious schools and a headscarf ban at universities. The Prime Minister at the time, Necmettin Erbakan, was forced to resign and banned from politics for 5 years when his welfare party was shut down the following year.
Once again, a democratically elected government was removed from power.
But this time through pressure instead of an overt coup. And while the military impeded yet another democratic process, some former members of the Welfare Party, including Recep Tayyip Erdogan, went on to found the Justice and Development Party and were elected to power soon after, only to rule the country for many years after that.
With the previous coup, July 15, 2016, gave nothing but a sense of déjà vu to many Turks.
On that day, a faction of the military loyal to US-based cult leader Fethullah Gülen acted on their own and broke the chain of command in an attempt to overthrow the government and unseat President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. They carried out what became the bloodiest coup attempt in Turkey's political history, but it failed miserably when Turks took to the streets and blocked tanks and soldiers, showing great defiance against what once again wanted to dismantle the country's democratic process. And sadly, at least 251 people lost their lives that day defending their country. Over the decades, the Turkish public has witnessed the detrimental damage coups inflicted and how they have always brought the country back by several years.
So this time, before letting any of that take place, Turks from all walks of life stood up and said no, making clearer than ever that this nation's will is for democracy to prevail. And this is why it's considered a day of victory for democracy.